Welcome back to Tide Pod, presented by Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton, Tony Sakalas back for another week and another roundup of the news from Alabama football and men's basketball that you need to know. And it's a big one, Tony. Normally we lead with football. I feel like at least we have led with football to start this show. And I think the headline story, though, from at least the last time we spoke to y'all, the gracious viewers, is on the basketball front, though. And I think that's where we got to start. We got plenty to dive into. We're still talking transfers, but this time we're going to talk about a official and confirmed transfer. A guy, of course, we spoke about last show that we're relatively confident, or at least if you were Preston Murphy, very confident would come to Alabama. Preston Murphy's confidence was rewarded. His bat signals or Clifford signals were rewarded because, of course, if you were living under a rock the last few days, Clifford Omoruyi, the highly touted rim protector center from Rutgers, is joining the Alabama Crimson Tide. He announced his transfer just a couple of days ago, picked them over North Carolina, Kansas State, and Georgetown by the looks of things. A huge addition. I mean, we talked about it last show, Tony, and some of the stuff that has come out in the hours and days since has only really affirmed how big of an addition this is. And how huge of a get this is for Nate Oats and company. There was reports that he turned down very large NIL offers. I've seen anywhere from $1.5 to $2 million from other schools. There's some stuff just about him and why he wanted to come to Alabama. But that alone, I think, what a huge get here for Nate Oats. More importantly, probably for the reputation of Preston Murphy on Twitter, because if he hadn't gone to Alabama, I don't know. I don't think Alabama fans would have taken him very seriously after that.
Yeah, that would have been rough. I mean, how many times did he tease with, random and I loved how the Clifford, the big red dog, was like hidden in like on someone's hat or like behind a bench or something. I don't have great eyes, so it took me a while to find all of those. But Preston Murphy did some elite level teasing for that one. He kind of had to deliver. And how about Roll Tide Willie? He's 2 for 2. He also closed the deal on the Ryan Williams thing. So, maybe he's the the Nick Saban closer jacket where he wore the blue jacket when he was closing on kids. Maybe Roll Tide Willie's that for Alabama. And transcends 2 different sports too, to get Ryan Williams and to get Cliff Omoruyi. I think that those are obviously, getting Omoruyi, is probably the biggest move Alabama's made this offseason. I think even if they're able to convince Mark Sears to come back, this is the biggest move, just because this is the one thing that was really lacking from Alabama last season. If they would have had a guy like this, I don't know if they would have gotten past a UConn, but I bet you they beat Purdue, or anybody else really besides UConn. Obviously they didn't get a chance to play Purdue, but I think that, I'd put Alabama with an Omoruyi on last year's team ahead of a lot of other teams. So, and shoot, maybe they would have, given UConn an even better game. But I think this is the one thing that's really been missing, is that post presence. He's not going to be a guy that's going to really shoot or really do a lot on offense. He can provide some presence down low. I think he's like a 10-8 kind of guy, like 10 points, 8 rebounds. But really it's about his defense, and he averages 2.9 blocks a game. We've seen Alabama just bullied by 7-footers last year. That's, probably not going to be the case. And then we also saw how well Grant Nelson can play in the 4 while playing the 4. And this should allow Grant Nelson to stay out of foul trouble, to play the 4. I think he's, with him coming back, I think he's going to have an even better year. So this could be a really huge addition for Alabama, and I think it really makes them a top 2 team. And I personally have them as the best team in the nation, but I think you could really make an argument for Kansas as well. But man, it's exciting. We'll have to see what happens with Mark Sears, but regardless, I think this Alabama team is in really great shape now.
Yeah, you mentioned the 2.8 blocks. I think he had 93 in total last season. That was top 5, I think second in Division I, and led the Big Ten with Rutgers. He's played for 4 seasons. He has a bunch of experience. And yeah, he will bring that big presence. That was the biggest question mark for Alabama last year, and their biggest kind of challenge at times was getting that rim protection. And you do have to give Grant Nelson some credit, I think, Tony, with the way he did, do an all right job at times being a rim protector when that was so clearly not his position. And I don't think you can overstate, like you said, how much that is going to be unleashed, or he might be unleashed now. Next year playing the 4. I mean, this was a guy that was preseason first team All SEC. I think he was kind of expected to be what Dalton Connect of Tennessee turned into last season, where you had this guy that, scored a lot at a mid-major. Can it translate? Nelson, sort of was playing a hybrid role. And then you saw in the tournament at times, what he was able to do. And now I think he's going to be able to do that much more consistently.
It's not just the playing the 4 might open him up. I think just it's going to keep him out of foul trouble. With him having to play the 5, that obviously puts him in position to foul more. He's, it's going to take away some of his minutes. Now, if you're putting him in a position where he'll have to foul, or he'll be in position where he'll probably will foul less, keeping him out on the court could be a big deal. I could still see times when he spells Omoruyi at the stretch 5 if they need him to do that. I mean, we've seen that Grant's able to do that. And Alabama still doesn't have a ton of depth at that center position. I know they have Aiden Sherrill coming in as McDonald's All-American, but there's still not a lot of like true centers. I mean, really those 3, Nelson, Sherrill, and Omoruyi, those are kind of your only real true centers. Now, Nate Oats can get creative with how he plays, but I think the biggest thing when you look at Nelson is just keeping him out of foul trouble. And I look at some of the last few games where he was able to stay out on the court for a long time. And those are the games that he was really putting up some big numbers. I think foul trouble kind of hurt him at times. So, I think that's going to be really big for multiple reasons. And how about, another thing too, Jack, is how about Aiden Sherrill coming in and getting to learn under an experienced big like Omoruyi? That's something that I don't think a lot of people have talked about, but he's still going to be in a somewhat of a developmental stage, even though he's a McDonald's All-American. Having that mentorship from one of the best bigs in the nation, that can only help as well. So.
Yeah, I actually brought that up, and you guys, everyone watching this, if you're not subscribed to Tide Illustrated, the site should. I talked to Clifford Omoruyi after he committed, and I asked him, about that very thing where you have guys like Aiden Sherrill, Jaron Stevenson, assuming he comes back, 2 bigs that are younger, Mohamed Diabate as well. 3 bigs that are younger, still developing in their career. Are you going to act as a leader? And Omoruyi was saying, yeah, he wants to help this team any way he can. He said he knew some of the recruits that Alabama is bringing in, of course, in their historic class, which another win for Nate Oats here in the offseason. He says he knows a couple of those guys. Seems like he's just, willing to do that, like you said, Tony, and help. And I want to bring up this other thing. And I think this, is a broader topic that we should touch on, and not to reveal everything I talked to Cliff about, but one thing that really struck me, and I think it's especially interesting considering what I said at the beginning with the NIL money that had come out, that he was offered from some schools. He felt that Alabama was the right place for him to reach his ultimate goal, which is any college player's ultimate goal, get to the NBA. He liked what he saw from their facilities and their training, other training staff. He liked what Oats showed him, and he liked the system we run. And I feel like we hear all about that. Oats runs a fast-paced system. He shoots a lot of threes. It's very perimeter-focused. It's a lot of spacing, which is how NBA teams kind of run their systems. But I think it was fascinating to hear that, come out of the horse's mouth, so to speak, in a new player coming in who was highly coveted by these other schools, who could have gone to wherever he wanted and clearly could have gotten paid whatever he wanted, values something like that above everything else. I think that says a lot about Cliff Omoruyi, and I think more importantly for Alabama, says a lot about Nate Oats and the kind of talent he's able to bring in.
Yeah, before I get started, it's not like he's coming to Alabama for free. I know that they put up a good NIL package as well, but it's not. I'd be surprised if Alabama's package was touched $1 million. I don't think that they have that money, budgeted for that move. Now, maybe there was a late surge that I don't know about, but I bet you
anonymous donors.
Yeah, I bet you Alabama was outbid by, if you look at some of these, the 1.7s or the 2, I mean, by double of what Alabama is offering. I could maybe see Alabama maybe touching the 800,000 mark just from the numbers that I was hearing. I don't think that you're starting to encroach the anything higher than that, you're starting to encroach the amount of money that they're saving back for Mark Sears. And you would just think that, they're not going to pay Omoruyi more than Sears. So yeah, I doubt, Alabama touched $1 million for him. So for him to turn down those offers, that's huge. I mean, look at this offseason too, Jack. You've got a notable, elite transfer turning down a bigger offer at North Carolina to stay at Alabama. And then you have Alabama holding off Kentucky for which wanted its head coach. And in the same offseason, it just really shows you where Alabama basketball is at. I mean, I wouldn't make the mistake of calling Alabama a blue blood, but like temporarily they're acting like one. They are acting like an elite college basketball program where people want to be. And I think that it's a couple things. I think people recognize that Nate Oats' system is very modern. It's very much what you're going to get if you want to go to the NBA. It's a very NBA-like system. It's going to prepare you well for the league. I think that's one of the things Omoruyi told you, is that he wants to play fast. He wants to do stuff that is going to be what he's going to be called on to do at the NBA. So he'll get to do that at Alabama. But I think the other thing is, and this might, influence Mark Sears' decision. It might influence some of the other players that elect to stay. Alabama's got a legit chance for a national title. Not, I think before in the past we've talked about, Alabama has a chance to make some noise in the tournament. You were never bold enough to say Alabama basketball has a legit chance of the national title. I think this is the first time since, I went to college at Alabama from 2008 to 2012. I've been on the beat here since 2016. This is the first time I've heard remotely that Alabama will have a shot at winning the national title. I think even with the Brandon Miller team, people were more concerned about just making the Final Four. I think at that point, maybe the title was thought about a little bit, but I don't think people dared to dream that high. Now, I mean, I don't want to say it's an expectation because it's so hard to, expect a national title, but it's definitely something that Alabama should set out as its goal, because there's a couple of teams. There's probably only a handful of teams that can, at this point, go into the season saying, "Hey, we can win a national title," and I'd have to say Alabama was one of them.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, and I think that's a good segue because, when we talk about Mark Sears and and his whole kind of situation right now, as far as it stands, obviously, the dates and stuff to make those clear. He obviously declared for the NBA draft. He has until May 29th. We're recording this. You'll hear this on May 8th. As far as that is the deadline for him to decide whether he wants to come to college or stick in the NBA draft and finish his eligibility. He was invited to the NBA draft combine. That by no means strengthens or necessarily weakens his opportunity. A lot of guys get invited to the NBA draft combine. It's a big event. It's a little bit different than the way the NFL draft combine works. He's going to do meetings. He's going to go through this whole process. But to scale it back to what you said, to me, I was thinking about that. That does feel like more of an influence of, yes, these guys' ultimate dreams are the NBA, and Mark Sears may see, I'm not going to really raise my stock in another season in college. I want to go pro now. I want to get started on living that dream. But you have about as strong of a pull to get him to return to school as you're going to get with what you just said, is that Alabama is a legitimate national title contender, and Mark Sears knows in his heart of hearts he would be the best player on a team that is a national title contender if he comes back. And I think there is that there is a pull there. There is something to be said about thinking about that potential versus your pro prospects that aren't super clear to him right now, at least publicly.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Sears is, has a chance, and probably will be if he comes back, to be unquestionably the best player in Alabama. I'm not going to do period every time in Alabama history. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think he can be the best player in franchise history, and I think that's our program history. Sorry. I think that if the money's somewhat equal with the NIL and what he's going to be making, whatever professionally, I think that it's worth coming back. He's an Alabama kid, just the chance to be that kind of legend. It's not like you're, once again, not doing it for free. He's going to, get a big NIL package to do it. But yeah, I think it makes it a little bit more enticing to be on a team that can win. And then for him, especially though, I think just the his place in Alabama history would be, worth considering. Because I mean, his place in Alabama sports history too. I mean, can you imagine if he brought him to 2 different Final Fours? When they hadn't even made it a Final Four. I mean, he's up there not only just in Alabama basketball history, but when you look at Alabama athletes in general. So he can make a big rise and really cement himself. Not that he hasn't to a certain extent already, but really cement himself in the program and in the school's history. So that's something to consider. I know overall, that won't matter if an NBA team, gives them a certain dollar range. And I think, everyone's dreams to play in the NBA. So not saying he's definitely coming back, but I do think that there is, there's reasons outside of money and with some money, but like there's reasons outside of money too, that it makes sense for him to come back and that he really has something to play for in terms of a reputation and legendary status. And, I mean, a lot of these kids dream about playing the NBA, but a lot of them, you dream about winning that NCAA title, and he has a chance to do that. And that's something that he'll take with him for the rest of his life. So we'll see. I mean, I'm putting a lot of pressure too, if he does decide to come back, but another thing is, will he help out his draft stock with another year? Maybe not. I don't really know how much he's going to help his draft stock, but playing another year in Nate Oats' system and getting ready and kind of maintaining that consistency. I mean, it's not a bad thing. I don't think it's going to hurt him, barring an injury. I don't see it hurting him. So I can get the reason to come back. I can also get the reason to leave. It's just going to come down to what that dollar figure is. But from what we're hearing, I think there's a lot of optimism that Mark Sears is going to come back.
Yeah, I think from a stock perspective, I mean, there is a very real, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of what Mark Sears' NBA value is, because it is legitimately different than what his college value is. That's just how this works. That's why you see players go high in the draft where their college teams are terrible. It just is what it is. But there is something to, there have been countless stories, you can look them up, of players who get a significant boost in their NBA draft stock by going on a run in college and by having having an incredible tournament. I look at someone like Marquise Noel, who played for Kansas State a couple of seasons ago, smaller guard, similar to Mark Sears, scorer. When they went, all the way to the Elite Eight and he was dropping 35 a game, turned some heads. And again, it got him some looks at the pro level. So there's something to say.
Charles Bediako last year, and to a lesser extent, not to a crazy, run extent, but he was playing very solid basketball at the end of last season. And I think caught a lot of people by surprise because, early on in the season, I don't think he's somebody that you would have thought would have been a pro. Mm-hmm. And then he plays really good basketball at the end of the season. Alabama doesn't go as far as it wants to, but he still looks good doing it. And then all of a sudden, he leaves unexpectedly. So,
yeah, I think it's something to consider. I
don't think Alabama's in terrible shape either if Mark Sears leaves. That's one thing I was going to try to segue to too. What do you think? What's your opinion if Mark Sears May 29th comes and he decides, actually, you know what? No, I'm staying in the draft. I have a good feeling. What do you think about Alabama's shots?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on it. I think you're right to, very comfortably assume this team is a top 5 preseason team. I personally, as when I observe college basketball from a holistic thing, have about 7 teams that I would say should be ranked top 5, and obviously 2 of them won't. I don't think Alabama will be one of those 2. And I think if Mark Sears goes, you have a very strong case to probably stay within that range. I think, there's so much turnover nowadays, and I will give credit to a couple of teams. I think of a team like Houston and North Carolina and Iowa State. They've done all right at retaining talent as well, which I give credit to them and Alabama with guys like Nelson and Stevenson, should he choose to come back, and Latrell Wrightsell. It's so hard to keep players now, and I think that's a really legitimate thing. And you're still bringing back, 2 rock solid pieces of your core in Wrightsell and Grant Nelson from a year ago. And then I think the transfers you got are about as perfect as you can get them. Obviously, if Sears, runs all the way down to the wire, you're heading into June with an open scholarship spot. You're going to have a lot more limited options as to the 13th guy you bring in. but that's just it. I mean, this team is so deep from 1 to 12 with, the transfers you brought in, the returners you got, and the class. I mean, you touched on Aiden Sherrill. They got Darian Reed, LeBaron Philon, Naz Cunningham. It's the best recruiting class Nate Oats has ever had. Some of those guys are going to play and are going to play pretty significant minutes. And so I think from a depth perspective, you're still in really good shape. I would say top 10 for sure. And you're probably still pushing that top 5 range, by the time these preseason polls come out.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see, because obviously if you're saving money for Mark and then you're going to have that NIL money and that scholarship, it's just a matter of, if you're coming up on June, like who's going to be there.
Who's available?
If there is somebody there, I mean, you would then think that Alabama would have some money to spend and a spot to spend it on. But let's just say like that spot doesn't happen. Let's just say or they get like a, maybe another bit small, like another big to add depth, but he's just like a depth piece, not a big guy.
Like a Mo Wage.
Yeah, like a Mo Wage. Like let's say they get somebody like that. They don't obviously you're not going to spend all your Mark Sears budget, but let's just say that you save some money and you just get somebody like that. And I think Aiden Holloway, LeBaron Philon, having those two guys as guards, I mean, they're both 5-star talent kind of guards. You could do a lot worse than having those. And I think Aiden Holloway, especially, you look at what he did at Auburn, I think, not to say that, like Auburn like ruined him or whatever, but I think there's a player there and it just didn't click with Auburn. Maybe it would have clicked if he would have stayed for another year, but I do think there's a player there and I think he fits Nate Oats' system. And I could see, I don't think he's going to be Mark Sears level, but I do think he could be drastically improved. And there's a lot of talent there. And between him and Philon, I think you probably have a good point guard to play with. So even if you don't fill Mark, which I do think that they'll be able to find someone at that time to kind of maybe add some depth or just, they have that money to burn. I think.
Well, and you have the scholarship spot as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that they'll be able to find someone that will help the roster. So it's going to improve that way. But I do think even if let's just say that spot evaporated, the team that they have currently right now, even without Mark, I think it's a really good team. I think it's probably a top 10 team. I'm not sure if it's a top 5 team. I think at that point you're, projecting a lot on Aiden Holloway or LeBaron. I think that, it has the potential to be a top 5 team, but I think at the moment, I think it'd make them a top 10 team without Mark Sears, and then probably number 2 overall with Mark Sears. I don't think there's the player in college basketball in the draft or whatever that has as much influence on their team as Mark, though. I think that, he could really help Alabama a lot more than a lot of these other guys that could theoretically come back.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. And, the other thing with Aiden Holloway is it didn't work out ultimately at Auburn, but this was a guy who, if you really want to get excited about Aiden Holloway, watch all of his non-conference tape. I mean, the guy was a tremendous shooter. He's a great playmaker. And again, you are relying a lot on him as a sophomore to come in and do that, and be at the level or near the level that Mark Sears was. There's going to be a drop off there. That is what it is. But I think you're right. The other talent they've accumulated, it's enough to for sure get a significant hype and attention in these preseason polls, and then should warrant still pretty large expectations. I'd also be interested.
Different players, but I mean, Rylan Griffin wasn't shooting to his potential, and this is a totally different situation, different players, but Rylan Griffin wasn't shooting to his potential in his first season, and we saw him make that jump his second season. So sometimes it's just about getting comfortable in the league.
We have lost so much patience with players in this day and age of college basketball where, I look at someone who left Alabama, someone like a Sam Walters. I mean, he could develop into a great shooter. He's still got 3 years of college left and went to Michigan, another high major school. They had a really crappy year last year, but, there's still some value there. It is, in the consistent turnover world that is this era of college basketball, I think Nate Oats is doing right by, he understands that and rebuilds really well. But yeah, I mean, some of the situation is just patience. I think it's these guys don't have to have off the charts numbers right when they come into Alabama, but they're high major. Aiden Holloway was a high major talent. He was a highly touted high school recruit. I think that'll be a fine pairing. I'd be curious. I'm curious too. I mean, Nate Oats has gone in the last 2 years without filling all of the scholarship spots. He gave one to Davin Cosby during the 2023 season, and of course, gave the one to Kai Spears last year. I don't. Maybe he gets to June and he says it's too soon to training camp. We've already started kind of integrating stuff for the summer. It's going to be too late to catch someone else up. I don't know, but
when's the date where? I know the portal date for the football is closed. Is there a portal date for basketball that's separate, or
to enter the portal, it is also closed. It was May 1st, one day
so
after.
Like the one that kind of, if we're just going down the roster, it's just you look at like a Mo Diabate and you're like, geez, like this guy's really good to be an end of the bench guy, right? I mean, he's a guy that just, I think it was really nice that they added all these people and we're still able to keep a guy like that. I really don't know what his role is, but I think keeping him, so if he's just locked in the roster, I think you look at him and you're like, well, dang, like,
yeah,
that's a luxury that not a lot of people have. I think he could, I mean, if he makes a jump, he could even be a starter on a low level, SEC team if he was to make the jump. I mean, this is a kid that's I think former Rivals 100 kid. So he's, in that second year. He's kind of an awkward size at 6'7", but he's still kind of thick. But I think he can provide some post presence, and maybe that's where he helps out with Alabama, is kind of like helping. They're kind of thin at he's not going to be like a true 5 or anything, but he can probably help in the post presence, which I guess is like the one area, if they don't return Mark Sears, this team might have even the sliver of a weakness.
Well, I mean, you saw him do that in the NCAA tournament against Grand Canyon. I mean, he had Mohamed Diabate had his moments last year. I know, I'm not going to make this the Mohamed Diabate show, but you are right. I think it speaks to circle kind of all the way back to how talented this team is if that's your last guy off the bench as a scholarship guy, you're not complaining.
Or Nos Cunningham. I mean, like a guy that's like, what I think he's like 30 something overall, but he was a former number 1 overall recruit. Like that could be your second guy second guy from the end of the bench. I mean, shoot, there's a ton of people that would have he would have highlighted their recruiting class. A lot of programs where they would have loved. He would have been the gem of their recruiting class, and he's like now an end of the bench guy for Alabama. It's just this team is 1 to 13. Or if you don't want to count Mark right now, 1 to 12, just absolutely just stacked.
Yeah, you look at someone like Chris Parker last year, 4-star recruit, top 100 player, redshirted, left the program. We didn't even get to see what Chris Parker was outside of, I think I filmed one warm-up dunk that he had before the Sweet 16, and everyone was like, why isn't this guy playing? And then you watch Alabama on the court, and you're like, there's no room. You can only have 5 guys on the court at one time. And
that scout team next year is going to be lethal.
Well, and I mean, there's a thing to that. I mean, you talk about how hard Oats runs his practices, what that stuff kind of looks like. We've had a glimpse in that now with him being 5 years into his career at Bama. I mean, you want these guys pushing, the starters and the best players. Like he's not afraid to be very public about who wins the blue collar points in practice, who looked the best, who was playing the hardest. I mean, that's how Davin Cosby earned minutes, was hitting shots in practice and doing all that stuff. So it's going to be interesting for sure. Going forward, whether or not you get Mark Sears back, I think the expectations will and should be sky high next year on the basketball front. Other quick thing before we segue to football, I will just touch on Jaron Stevenson. He, of course, was on the list, didn't publicly declare for the draft, but put his name in to test the waters. So he's in the same boat as Mark, technically, has until May 29th. He was not invited to the Combine, but he was invited to the NBA G League Elite Camp, which is in Chicago. It's basically a similar thing, just kind of at a lower level. I think that says all about what you need to say with Jaron Stevenson's stock. He's a fantastically interesting player to someone like me who loves the NBA draft because he's 6'10" and he's got these like kind of fun athletic tools. But, I don't think we quite saw enough out of him. And I don't think he got enough out of his first season to probably warrant any sort of call up. So I expect him back. That's probably my only
He's a guy that definitely needs another season. If he left for the NBA draft, I mean, you never know, right? Like you just need, all it takes.
Crazier things have happened, but yeah,
I think that would be bad advice. I think, I would, if Mark Sears stays in the draft, I would say, okay, I get it. I get it. Like, you're probably not going to improve your stock. You want to be professional. If Stevenson goes in the draft, you're like, man, he's getting some bad advice, because I just think he needs that extra year of development. Keep in mind too, he's a year younger than most college sophomores now, so because he enrolled early. So I do think that he needs that extra year. I wouldn't be surprised, especially if he makes a jump, that he's somebody that goes out in next year's draft. I think he's, like you said, he's got a lot of projectable tools. I just don't think he's ready yet, and I think that he's I think he's going to need another year, which he could be an interesting guy with another year too. I mean, I think that he kind of, maybe he's not somebody that with the new starting lineup that you're kind of putting into the starting lineup, but I think he'll get a lot of minutes, and he's somebody that can kind of come in and just think about him coming in for Grant Nelson. That's sick, especially when you think about how he improved, and he's got the mechanics on that 3-point shot. It just wasn't falling for him enough last year. If he can get that 3-pointer to fall, you talked about his size, his athleticism. I think, yeah, he can be a really special prospect.
It felt like a confidence thing overall for me. Was just it was all there when it was unleashed. It was great. And I think, yeah, you're talking there's going to be a lot less of a drop off, in my opinion, from a Grant Nelson to a Jaren Stevenson in his sophomore season versus what you saw probably at times last year. So, I think Alabama fans should hope he comes back. Otherwise, if him and Mark both go, there's 2 more scholarship spots for you. And then you're definitely finding at least one more guy probably in the portal. But that's a conversation for down the road. Obviously, we'll keep everyone updated with what we see publicly from Mark. Things to keep an eye on. Teams do tweet workouts and tweet interviews. Mark will talk to these teams. A lot of teams like to post, here's who we had today, come by and work out, and here's what we're looking at. So I'm sure Mark will be lumped in with some of that stuff. And obviously then the G League Combine, we'll see what numbers he kind of posts. That is from the 12th to the 19th of May, by the way, as a date on that. Let's segue, Tony. We're staying on the transfer portal front. I guess
all portal all the time.
Yeah, we kind of deviated from the transfer portal, I guess, for basketball, because it wasn't people they're linked to, it's people they already got. But for football, definitely some links here, and one that seems like it's on the verge, at least, or there were some reports that it's on the verge of coming true for football, is in the secondary. And I want to ask you at the end about your overall kind of transfer portal grade for the spring for Alabama. But let's talk about some of the guys we touched on last episode, one of whom looks like he's in the fold, or going to be in the fold here. DaShawn Jones, the cornerback from Wake Forest. I know defensive back in general is a big need for the Crimson Tide. We might go over a little bit of trodden ground here with Jones, but what's Bama presumably getting in him? He hasn't announced his commitment yet, but there are reports that he is looking set to commit.
Yeah, it's kind of like frustrating, because you want to talk about him like he's already here, because it's widely reported that he's going to be here, but he hasn't made that official yet. I still think that he's going to be an Alabama player, and I think it's a big add, because you just need depth, experience actually, and depth at the cornerback position. He's a guy that started for Wake Forest last year at the outside cornerback position. He's 6 foot 181. And I just think if you look at this Alabama secondary, I feel like I've said this a million times, but Damani Jackson's the only kind of player, scholarship cornerback on this team that even has a snap of college experience. So you just need enough, more bodies, but you also need more people that are, used to playing at this level. Even players that have been here and redshirted, it's not the same thing. So I do think DaShawn Jones is somebody that would come in and compete for that starting spot. I don't think he really would come if he didn't feel like he was going to do that. So, but I do think Xavier Brown is a nice player. I don't want to take anything away from him. He's a freshman that, worked on the first team this spring. I just think having a DaShawn Jones will kind of ease that transition for Xavier Brown. And you look at DaShawn Jones, he put up a solid season at Wake Forest, and I think he's got all the tools that you look for. I'm looking at right now, 3 interceptions, 2 pass deflections, 37 stops. His coverage grades from Pro Football Focus could be a little bit better, but I think, especially, this late in the portal, I think he's a quality get for Kalen DeBoer, and it just really an essential. I think, when you look at it, Alabama needed to get better on the offensive line, and they needed to get that experienced cornerback. They were able to get it with him. And so I feel a lot better about Alabama's secondary. Still think there's a little bit of question marks. I don't think Jones is somebody that comes in and just answers every question mark. He's, I think him and Damani Jackson both aren't as good as Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold. So you do take steps down, but I think both players have the ability to be good and to rise to the level that they need to. So I don't think Alabama's just like dead in the water anymore at cornerback. I think now that this gives them a little bit of a big boost, and it should make everyone better. I think, maybe not throwing someone like Xavier Brown into the fire makes him better. And so now you have a little bit of depth, and I just think it kind of snowballs from there. And so you need him, you need a guy like DaShawn Jones to come in and kind of create that snowball. So I don't think by any means cornerback's a strength for Alabama, but it's not as glaring as a weakness.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it well. It's not necessarily a program changing transfer. Not that, he can't develop into one, or wilder things can happen, but you're right. I think you described it well. It seems like it's overall just solid. And Alabama doesn't appear to be done anyway with their secondary. I believe we might have touched on Kobe Minor. That might have emerged. I can't keep track in my head of when rumors happen and when names pop up versus when we do this show. We touched on maybe Kobe Minor, the guy from Indiana, and he winds up, not really having as many links as we thought. But another guy,
I think this move kind of ruled out Kobe Minor. I think that's really what it is. I think both of those guys kind of wanted to come in and really compete for that first team spot. And once you bring in a DaShawn Jones, bringing in a Kobe Miners, there's only two starting outside cornerback spots. I think it's pretty much assumed that Damani Jackson's going to grab one of them. So I think this move has a lot to say with the other one, with Kobe Minor. I think had they struck out on Jones, maybe Kobe Minor becomes a real serious possibility.
Yeah. It's a good point. They don't want to come in just to sit on the bench, especially at Alabama when the bench is pretty darn talented, like you said, with the freshmen. But another guy in the secondary, Tony, we talked about King Mack, the Penn State transfer, seems to be trending in the right direction. What do you think of that being as a possible addition? I know safety isn't as needed as corner, but it kind of just feels like in general this DB room is just thin and could just use reinforcements. A guy in King Mack with a little bit less experience, but a former pretty high recruit, and some obviously a top school like Penn State wanted him, and now Alabama could maybe be in the fold.
Yeah, I think when you look at that too, you also got to figure in that Alabama lost Peyton Woodyard and Tony Mitchell, both safeties that would have provided some depth on this team, that were good enough to provide some depth. So then they bring in Cameron Howard from Charlotte, and it looks like they're probably, they're in a good position for King Mack from Penn State. I don't think these are guys that are going to be starters next year, but when you look at it, they're both somewhat young. Is King Mack going to be a sophomore or junior next year?
I believe a sophomore next year.
Sophomore, same with Howard, right? So really what you're doing is you're getting experienced depth, because you're going to lose probably Keon Sabb and Malachi Moore, your two deep safeties, starting this year. I think this is a nice little move to the future, whereas you can get that depth, but you could also promise guys like Howard and Mack that, like, hey, look, you sit 1 year, who knows, maybe there's an injury, maybe there's, something, you get to play. But if you're patient, then you can be the starter. And you kind of built for next year. I thought those were two kind of crafty moves that won't look sexy this year, but maybe, next year when you're looking at it, all of a sudden Alabama has somebody with experience that, can kind of like step up and make that transition. Because, this is a constant every year thing where you're going to lose players. I think this kind of helps you out a lot for next year.
Yeah, I think as a depth piece, as much as and again, to know if you're a guy like King Minor, like, you put him in and he's, the first guy off the bench. He knows that he might rotate in a little bit even this year, and again, will kind of be that long-term option potentially to replace Keon Sabb, like you said.
It's King Mack.
What'd I say? That combine both of them?
King Minor.
Oh God, no, not that. Not that.
Big Ten hybrid safety corner.
Yeah, from two. Another guy in the portal, Tony, I think we touched on last time as well, but another one trending in the right direction on the offensive line now here. Fun name, by the way, before I say it, Gino Vandemark from Michigan State. I think is a really interesting one. I mean, you and I have talked a lot about the need at center for Alabama. This guy played a little bit at center, spent most of his time at right guard at Michigan State. What do you think of him maybe coming in, especially given the thinness it also looks like Alabama might have at the center position? Do you think he maybe comes in and competes there?
I think he does. I think one thing that kind of stands out for me is, well, first of all, he played under Coach Koplovich, who's the Alabama offensive line coach, first year offensive line coach. And one thing Cap said was that he got all of his players, or like 8 or 9 of them, he would really work on them with snapping duties. And this is a guy that's not only, keep that in mind, and then also keep in mind that he has worked at center earlier on in his Michigan State career. So I would expect him to come in and play that center position. Look, that's kind of similar to the last transfer center they brought in, like Landon Dickerson. It worked out pretty well with him. He was kind of a guy that played some guard at Florida State. He comes in and then eventually becomes Alabama's center. I think that, I think that you probably compete. Now you have Parker Brailsford, who sat out the spring with, personal issues that are non-football related. Kalen DeBoer said that, shouldn't be concerned with him, that he's going to come back to the program, but he still missed spring camp. And, I think that he's still very much a question mark, as talented as he is. So having that competition at center, I think you feel a little bit better. Obviously, we didn't touch on it yet, but Alabama did lose James Brockermeyer to the transfer portal as well. So the guy that was your first team center this spring is now gone. I think you need to bring in another guy, and it could be a really big battle between those two this fall, assuming that Alabama, assuming that he does come here. So.
Yeah, again, I think you preface that importantly. Is King Mack and Gino Vandemark are not done deals yet. There's been reported links, obviously the natural one with Coach Kaplovich and Gino, but yeah, those still have yet to get over the line. But I think they seem like two logical fits, like Tony just explained. I want to finish things here, Tony, with you wrote a piece recently where you graded every SEC team and how they did in the spring window. And of course you gave one to Alabama. You graded them an A. You listed their key additions, of course, as Caden Proctor and Graham Nicholson, the kicker, as well as DaShawn Jones, presuming that one gets over the line. And then key subtractions, Peyton Woodyard, who you mentioned going to Oregon, the true freshman, or about to start his freshman year, I guess. James Brockermeyer, you mentioned him as well, going to TCU. And then Tony Mitchell, another guy in the secondary who hasn't found a new school yet, but is also set to depart. You have those key additions and subtractions. Obviously, Alabama can still add stuff in the summer, but given that the spring portal window is closed now, no one else can enter, at least. You gave the Crimson Tide an A. What went behind that? And, what did you think of their spring here as a whole?
Yeah, I think that, I kind of cheated a little bit, I guess, by giving them credit for DaShawn Jones before they officially got him. But assuming the fact that, let's just assume that does happen, like we're all expecting. When you look at Alabama, there wasn't a ton of tackles available, like elite tackles available, and Alabama needed one. And so it kind of seems, like less exciting because Caden Proctor was the left tackle last year, and they're, re-adding him instead of adding him. But when you look at it from a pure transfer portal rankings perspective, Alabama added the biggest difference maker tackle, and that was their number one position of need. So they were able to address that. I think getting Graham Nicholson to replace Will Reichert is just such an unexpected boost that, how often are you able to get the Lou Groves Award winner to replace the best kicker in your program's history? So that's great. If you get DaShawn Jones, I think you answered that other big need at cornerback. I didn't even factor in. I think all that is enough to give you an A. But if you get a guy like Gino Vandemark to help you out with the interior offensive line, guys like King Mack, Cameron Howard. I didn't put him in the article, but I kind of alluded to the fact that they helped out their secondary. So I think it could. I mean, shoot, if you get Gino Vandemark and King Mack and DaShawn Jones becomes final, I think you could even make an argument that it is an A+ considering the circumstances. But I think an A is a good. I think Kalen DeBoer delivered. It took him a while for that cornerback spot, and we'll have to see how that works out. But I think he delivered what the market gave him. I think he delivered about as much as you can expect, and so that's why I gave him an A.
Yeah, I think you had sound logic. I support the grade as a as a whole. But yeah, I think there's some kind of nice cherries on top maybe of this spring window, and assuming Jones comes in, you've addressed your biggest need there at corner for Alabama, and now it comes down to finally, it feels like, you hope the months kind of fly by, you get to August and you start to see these guys in fall camp, see what DeBoer and company can kind of make of them, and see where this new era kind of starts to blossom in his first season. Tony, any final things before we step away? Any things to plug? I don't know.
I'll just talk one more time just about how big that tackle position is. You look at Caden Proctor and just imagine if, Kalen DeBoer wasn't able to reel him back. Mm-hmm. You have Elijah Pritchett, who's now been arrested twice this offseason, didn't look great at A-Day. And then you've got 2 redshirt freshman tackles on the other side. That's a huge hole. I don't think people realize how big of a hole and how well Kalen DeBoer filled that with Caden Proctor, who I think is going to be improved. Now he had his own growing pains last year, but I can't, that is a huge reason why I was able to, give Alabama that A. I think if you look at moves this offseason, that's right up there with, probably in the top 10 moves in the spring portal in terms of impact, even though it's a re-edition. I just can't say enough about that. And it's going to be really exciting to see what Caden looks like. The only thing about Caden is we didn't get to see him in the spring, nor with with Alabama, nor with Iowa. So that's the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to seeing is, I heard he lost some weight. I think that could be huge for him. And then kind of just seeing what Alabama does, I think you pencil him as a starter. So I think that creates some more competition on the other starting spot, and it might not just go to Elijah Pritchett. Maybe Elijah Pritchett now has to fight with a Wilkin Formby or Miles McVay, and I think that competition is going to only strengthen the other side. So I can't say enough. That was just such a huge move for Kalen DeBoer, and really, people that say, "Oh, well, we'll see how he recruits." You got to look at his big wins, and he has had some big ones. That one doesn't look as sexy, and he probably doesn't get enough credit for it, but that was a huge win for Alabama.
Without a doubt. I think that's a good note to end things on. Hopefully everyone enjoyed this. Hopefully everyone got excited to see the Clifford Omoruyi news finally be done and dusted, and now we await for Mark Sears to kind of finalize the dream roster here for Alabama on the basketball front, and football looking pretty solid as well. Turn some attention to the recruiting trail here in the coming months. We got OVs coming up and all that for the class of 2025. Always fascinating stuff. Plenty of activity for us on Tide Illustrated. Go subscribe there. Subscribe here if you're watching on the YouTube. Follow us on Spotify if you're listening. Plenty of play. You can find us everywhere. Good Lord. But yeah, follow us on all those platforms. Until then, see you next time.